So from this like MIT technology report that I was talking to you about, there were 6 major problems companies were reported in the poll that they're having. Large portion of them has to do with the quality of the AI output. So hallucinations, toxicity, 72% said they hadn't, fixed that problem. Integration with additional infrastructure, 62% problems. High cost for AI model training. This was something I was hearing too at a AWS reInvent, where people were talking about how, wow, we've spent so much money on fine tuning all of our models, and it's really becoming too much. It's becoming too much of a cost. Or individuals who are saying that we got clients because they were spending all this time and money fine tuning their models, but now they're just using RAG, or now they're trying to use RAG, or they're trying to use a small language model or something slightly different. So I'm not surprised to hear that. This one, we have experience with this, which is latency from models and systems. 56% of companies trying this are having problems with that. And then scaling for more users and throughput from the applications that they're building or the integrations, 51%. So half, coin flip, people are having problems with that. And I think it's, I'm not surprised, because these are challenges, we've had to overcome this year and that we've talked about. And I find quite funny from the perspective that I had heard in the beginning of the year. In the beginning of the year, I remember trying to learn a bit more about what companies enterprise level are really implementing GenAI, and I stumbled upon this conference, Leveraging GenAI for Enabling Enterprise Transformations. I think it was sponsored by Avasant, and they had all the executives, and they all looked at each other. This was about 6 months ago, I think. All looked at each other, and they're like, "This is the year of production. We're all going into production this year." And I've been around enough to know what it means to move a large-scale application into production. And, Q3 report from this MIT review said that only 5% have reported use cases in production as of May, when the report was given. And that is 5% of the 79% that was projected to have production applications. So I think the data kind of tracks the story that I've seen, which is last year, a lot of people thought we were going to be able to move production GenAI applications into reality, but there's a lot of problems. Namely, these 6 problems I just talked about that are preventing them from getting into that. So, Aaron, Scott, thanks for joining me today to kind of talk about lessons learned from building LLMs this year in 2024. I know y'all have been in the trenches really solving these problems, encountering them, and figuring out solutions. So I think this is a very timely conversation.
Yeah, I agree. We're solving them for our customers, and we're also solving them for ourselves as we try to build out Data Pilot, right? And yeah, I mean, it's just the most obvious thing, right, is that we've encountered immediately is the power and also the drawback of LLMs, to just their variability and creativity, right? The hallucination is real. And basically everything we've done so far has been to put guardrails around it. There's building system prompts, right, to make sure that they work within the parameters of our particular use case, and not just generally Claude or ChatGPT or whatever. And they sort of like each LLM kind of responds very differently based on the parameters set by like system prompts, right? And so being able to essentially prototype how a LLM will react to the system prompt is kind of like a critical thing to do.
Yeah, it could be helpful if you could explain a little bit more about like what is a system prompt. Is a system prompt kind of is it the nuts and bolts of what do you mean when you say a guardrail? Because I know there's all this talk about you need guardrails, but I'm not bowling, I'm not pulling up the bumpers. But what is that in practice? Is it the system prompt?
Well, that's the first line of defense, in my opinion, right? Because without it, you're just talking to ChatGPT. The general full context of the entire learning model for the civilization is like the generator of how it responds to you. It's too wide, right? That's the main thing. It's just too wide. It will draw start bringing in unwarranted insight from somewhere else, right? For your particular thing. And would you say, Scott, that's a main thing, but actually crafting system prompts that describe your particular domain and the rules surrounding them, the response rules, the amount of the persona it takes on, that's paramount.
Yeah. So I think what a system prompt is basically giving the LLM the ground rules and what persona it should play. So you'd be like, you are an expert on social media, or you are an expert on, biomedicine, and that kind of biases the kind of response that it gives. And then you go way beyond that. You can go way beyond that as far as like, giving it guidelines and a lot of specific instructions of like what to do and what not to do. And then you go through iterating on that, because you have to test what kind of output you get. And it's not always exactly correct. So then you iterate on that system prompt to try to get closer to reliability.
I'm going to give you an extreme example of what can happen if you don't use a good system prompt, or if you don't use a system prompt. This is fun. In the development of a data pilot, there are three kinds of like actors that you can, you need to coordinate the coordination. You coordinate conversation between three distinct actors: the user, your assistant, and the system, right? That's your SaaS. And a naive way is just to to use the conversation stream to just tell the LLM who's what without any system prompt. What's intriguing, so now you just basically say like you're chatting to ChatGPT or Claude. The user says this, and then the LLM responds, right? And then the system showed this to the user in the UI. Those are like conversational elements, right? Every time you make send a message to the LLM, you have to send the entire conversation. If you just kind of send that as is, and even if you just describe in the beginning, the first message, the system prompt, right, without actually formally telling it it's the system prompt, the LLM, like Claude, for example, will think it's talking to itself the whole time. So what occurred is that, and it's amazing, we found that for non-polemic conversations, like normal conversations, like LLMs that are advanced like Claude, will just roll with it and just continue to send responses normally, like itself. But if the instant you start like damaging the parameters of communication by being difficult or vague or obtuse, we have experimentally shown that without the system prompt being sent as a system prompt, eventually the LLM starts spinning and self-conversing stream of information, which causes it to eventually crash, which is fascinating. And this is just not using the system prompt like it is. It's just like need to actually send it as a system prompt to tell the LLM that there are guardrails. When we saw this, it was a fascinating exercise in debugging to realize that was what was wrong. Yeah, Scott, right? You helped with that prematurely. Anything else to add about that experience?
Yeah, it was just kind of a funny thing. The thing about Claude is it's pretty good. We had an kind of a silly bug where all the messages were getting sent as the role of user instead of like system, and even including the system prompt. So it was like a bunch of messages, and it seemed like I, the user, said all of it. So as the more and more conversation got built up, every time you send a message in a chat stream, you have to send all the previous messages as well to keep the context going. But it was basically like I was talking to itself, and eventually Claude starts talking to itself because it's like, well, this is what the user's doing.
Wow. Yeah.
Where that was the problem. We had like, okay, Claude is kind of like saying something and then it's saying something else and it's responding, and it's never like returning, the conversation back to me.
And that's because eventually we were building up this giant context of like just me talking to myself, send all that. Once we fixed that problem, the self-dialoguing Claude or self-dialoguing all the LLMs, that went away.
Wow. No, that's incredible. That's like, there's prompt engineers, but then there's like GenAI psychologists. And
Yes, that's exactly what I felt like. I felt like this kind of GenAI psychologist afterwards. I just couldn't figure out what was called. Like, really, it only started happening when you started becoming obnoxious. And you really, that's the other thing too. You really do need to test the parameters of the LLM you're working with, like on the interaction parameters, especially if it's open, but it's like a chat interaction. Like how it will respond. The other kind of guardrails that we learned I learned something about it is structured output. There's a particular way you should get structured output to happen, and I'm looking forward in 2025. Like there's like formal specking, right? Formal specifications around structured output like emerging, but not all LLM vendors today support like structured output.
really, which ones do?
Meta does, right?
Oh no, OpenAI does.
Yeah. OpenAI.
They have like actual structured output, and I think Claude has it, but they're not the same.
Not
exactly the same. They're not the same standard.
But the standard is really important, and I foresee that being like there needs to be a spec, and there will be like there will be a RFC for. I'm pretty sure there is already, right? That I forget the name of it right now. Scott, you found it, like an open spec for structured output. But it's very important to get that going.
Oh, I think I think OpenAI uses JSON schema for like, so you can kind of define like a formal schema, and that's already. But I think Claude doesn't use the same thing.
But this is divergence. Convergence of structured output into like the standard like REST or HTTP or something like that is an inevitability. Now, absent that, you need to be really careful about how you ask for structured output. What structured output, when I'm talking about, is you tell the LLM basically, I need some data back. And if you don't tell it what format it's going to give you it in, it's just going to bloviate giant blocks of text. And then you have to parse it or ask another LLM to figure out what to do with it, right? Which is crazy. So it's basically you can ask the LLM to give me the output in XML or JSON or column list or something like that so that you can do post-processing. You can interact with that output in your system. Now, one of the things that I've learned is that if you do not structure your prompt properly, the LLM will hyper focus on the structure of the output and less on the processing of the actual information. And this is actually evident in the amount of time the LLMs respond when you give it like, oh, process this thing, summarize this, and make the JSON format envelope response. In bad cases, it seems to come back faster. I love this, right? But actually what it is, the LLM is not really paying much attention to the actual processing. It's more fixating on the JSON. And I've experimentally found this is true when the accuracy of computing the average of numbers or summary of whatever had a much higher degree of hallucination and inaccuracy when you send too big of a prompt that handles both the analysis and the structured output instructions. You should separate those until we figure it out. So that's actually what I do. You do a chain. I'm pretty sure this is a thing that people do elsewhere, right? But it's important learning, and obviously that reduces the efficiency and cost and increases the cost of the call. But you had to make those trade-offs, right? You want accuracy versus speed. So yeah, sometimes it's really not that important, right? To be
100%. It also seems like if you are aligning on a form of structured output of your LLMs, you sort of need that in order to do real analysis of, or it would help to do if you need real analysis of the output quality assurance and in all that, it would be helpful to have a standardized set of all that information.
Yes. Yeah. It'd be very handy if every single LLM had the same way of like getting structured output, and we don't have to incur the cost, right, of 2 calls. It's just baked in, right? And it's not baked in with all the LLMs for sure. And we in DataPilot, we have access to all the LLMs, right?
Yes. And so I'm curious, because hearing about the importance of structured data is something I have certainly experienced, and only experienced, thanks to working with y'all. And, this thing that we brought up a couple of times, which is data pilot. And that is like, if you could talk a little bit more about data pilot, but also a question came up for me, which is like, it seems like data pilot also kind of came out of this need for needing to better measure the output, better measure the process, and structure, and add structure to the outputs of intelligently doing LLM development. So that's what it's really coming together for me in this conversation from that angle as a process operational benefit. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
It kind of came out of a customer project where we needed to do some LLM based kind of categorization of incoming data, and we needed a way to test that, and a large data set of input. And so we ended up kind of building a really lo-fi UI where you could throw it a bunch of input and give it a prompt and see the output. And then we kind of realized that that's just basically a generalized need that you'll have if you have any kind of LLM development. And so data pilot kind of is our take on like a LLM workbench for like helping you build out a prompt to solve a task, and then generate some. And then it also goes way further than the original prototype thing that we built. It lets you synthesize or generate input data, and also, well, this is kind of Arn's brainchild at the moment, but he's additional awesomeness now where you can kind of use a chat bot to help you in all aspects of it. So why don't you talk about it more, Arn?
Yeah, I'll elaborate a little bit on the chatbot in a second, but I'll open first. I'll add a little bit color on the use case, and then bringing it back to structured data is because, we basically had we needed a way in order to break blobs of data into features, right? And those features need to be labeled with as attributes, and that is the purpose of structured data, so that downstream processing can happen. And then we needed to be able to know, like, well, as this version of Claude is cheaper but faster, and maybe you'll react differently, and is it good enough, versus the especially expensive kind of Claude? It's something like, it's those kinds of things we need to know, because doing those decisions at scale matter, right? So we had to know, like, how good is it? And so doing it in the Byzantine lo-fi way was a great way to start, but actually it's a generalized problem, right? So that's why, like, bringing it back to structured data is as a thing. What Scott was talking about is basically engaging the best of breed LLM to help you develop your prompts. That is actually making the LLM aware, data pilot, aware of your prompt and your data and what you need, what you accomplish. And that's the key, because then you can basically converse with the pilot, where I want to go. And the pilot's going to say, take this path, update your prompt this way. Do you like it? Oh, I like it. Okay, all right. But now we need to enrich the data set. It's not quite what you have. Now we can ask the pilot to go ahead and make more data for you in the same range, but a little bit differently. I need it to be negative. And now it creates a bunch of negative cases for you. Then you can run against your prompt. So then there is this like assistant working through the entire life cycle of creating a prompt that works perfectly for use case. And that's the chat part. Yeah. So I don't know. That's a long way of saying, yes, structured data is important. We're doing things with Data Pilot. Data Pilot was born based on the need to make such actionable structured data. Yes.
Fantastic. No, I think that's great. I think it's great. I know in my experiences of using it, it has, I think, extended my ability to engage with my own data as well as working with the LLM more than just working with like opening up my pro account, OpenAI, ChatGPT, and do that. You know, my prompts are only limited to my own knowledge of the prompt. It's nice to have the machine help me word my prompt so it knows. I imagine the machine knows the best way it wants to be talked to, just like people. So getting a little assistance with that, I think, is like right off the bat incredibly helpful. And then being able to see the difference between giving structured data versus non-structured data into the prompt, having as an expectation, certainly does improve the output. I wouldn't have learned or experienced that without the Data Pilot experience. So, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty neat with the chat because you can start off with like a really basic idea of what you want to do. Like, say I want to prioritize, customer requests. I've got just a whole bunch of customer requests. I want to prioritize them, and you can just say that, and then it'll be like, okay, and it'll kind of write a detailed prompt and like, oh, you would like to prioritize these as high, medium, low, and based on this and that, and then you're like, oh, I didn't think of those things. That's a good idea, and you can kind of dialogue with it to flesh out, more fully baked idea of what you want to do. And then you'd be like, okay, now can you generate me a bunch of customer cases that would be, prioritized differently, and then it will generate you a bunch of them. And then you can run it and see like what the output would give you. And then you can be like, okay, I need that to be a little bit more structured. Can you make that structured? And or I need the priority to be these exact values, high, medium, or low. And then it can just do that for you. And it's just like you can talk to a computer instead of like hunting around and clicking the buttons.
Just summarize that, but it's basically you can declare what you need happen, and then Data Pilot helps you make it happen and gives you feedback real time as you make it happen. So you make it happen collaboratively, but they're actually the one driving the airplane. You just need to say I need to get there, right? So that's Data Pilot in a nutshell.
What I'm excited about next is the tool calling and being able to chain multiple steps together.
That is actually something I'd love to talk about and is actually in Data Pilot. So maybe that'll be good for the next time.
Yeah, then let's schedule another time, Aaron. I'll let you get to your next thing. But thanks for coming on and contributing today. It was great getting to hear more about Data Pilot as well as your perspectives on some LLM development challenges from the year.
Thank you. Bye.
Guess we'll call it there.